Welcome to the
Club Dub Football Podcast,
where the only question is,
does your team make it into the club?
Can he get in? No, he cannot!
Welcome to the Club Dub Football Podcast. Through the season, our NFL podcast will take you through the slate of games each week. And as we talk through each tie, we'll be discussing who we think will be heading home and who will be grabbing a W and heading on victorious to Club Dub. As well as us talking through the likely winners and losers, we'll also take you to the storylines and superstars on each sideline and get you up to speed with everything you need to know for the games ahead. You can get involved too. Send your questions, predictions and more to us via email at clubdubpodcast@mail.com, or you can find and follow us on Twitter at clubdubpodcast.
Rex Ryan!
So welcome along to our third Club Dub podcast, and this week we're going to be focusing on the Conference Championship games. For the first time this season, the number of games being played are outnumbered by the number of contributors to this podcast. So that means that rather than looking at our game of the week, we'll all be picking our team of the week and letting you know who we think will make the Super Bowl. Evening, gents.
Evening, Rob.
So with 4 teams and 2 games, we're going to throw ourselves straight into it. And the first game of the weekend is on the NFC side of things, where we see the Packers against the Bucks. We're going to make sure that we get some Packers chat in early before the long diatribe of the Bucks comes from Phil a little later. So to kick us off, I'm going to hand over to you, Aldrin, and you're going to tell us why you think the Green Bay Packers are Super Bowl bound.
Well, I think the easiest answer is Aaron Rodgers, isn't it? That is the easiest answer as to why the Packers are Super Bowl bound. I just think this season, Aaron Rodgers has been sensational, back to kind of Super Bowl form that we've seen from him in the past. And you've got to say that he's the presumptive MVP for this year. He's been incredible through the air. They've got a really balanced offense at the minute, and I think that's been a real high point of watching them this year. Wide receivers, we kind of touched on it last week a little bit, but the receivers have really come into their own. And some of them, not big names. You look at Valdez-Scantling, Aaron Lazard, not big names per se, but have put up big numbers and big performances when they've had to. I think last week they were clinical, and I think that's probably the only real word to describe them, clinical against the Rams. I know when we were talking last week, we talked about Aaron Donald and whether he was going to be a factor. They've got so much talent on that Rams defense, and we didn't see any of it. I don't think they even got to Rodgers at all. And you think that in an offensive line without David Bakhtiari and players like that, players like Jason Pierre-Paul are going to be coming for Aaron Rodgers. Really? Why is that a thing?
We're going to talk Bucks not only in a little while, but for a long while, I'd imagine, based on the history of this podcast. But let's just imagine, that the Bucks play well on defense. Like you say, I can imagine them with what they've been able to scheme up this season, with Todd Bowles being able to take the run away possibly. And, the run is a big part of that offense. Like you say, with Rodgers being the superstar he is, I still think it's surprisingly balanced this year, probably the key to the Packers' success. But for them to take the run away and to take away such a potent passing game just feels like a bit of a step too far, doesn't it? I think even for one of the league's better defenses, they're going to have to do an awful lot on offense to keep pace with the Packers. I think broadly I'm with you.
I think that we've not even got to it, but last week, obviously you've got Jalen Ramsey trying to keep Devontae Adams quiet. And in large parts he did. I think Devontae Adams had something like 60 odd yards. So not massive numbers that we've seen from him this year, but still a touchdown and really well schemed to get him involved. I mentioned it last week. I think the Tampa weakness is that secondary. And I think certainly they can be got at. Rodgers is the guy that is going to be able to do that. He can throw deep with accuracy. And like Devontae Adams, Lazard with that kind of change of pace going down those long routes. I think that is going to be the way in which they'll get great success, because like you say, they've got a really good defense in Tampa that's been really effective against the run, but much, much weaker in that secondary. And somebody like Devontae Adams, you can imagine him going off and having an absolute field day. So the way Rodgers is playing this year, I just can't see beyond him.
I think they're valid points that you make. I think, we said before the Saints game that the secondary of the Bucs was weak, or had been a bit up and down and hadn't been played well, and they could really get after them. And I think what you saw is one of the best games of the season from the Bucs secondary. They picked Breeze off 3 times.
I think that says more about Breeze though than it does about the secondary. Do you know?
I don't disagree. I think Breeze in particular and some of the other weapons on the Saints didn't play particularly well. But we said before the game that the Bucs would need to put in a full defensive performance, and I think they did that last week. So again, you think it's a really, really, really tall task, and you think if they come in even 70% of their full potential, then it's you can see the Packers torching them through the air. But if they play like they did last weekend, it's going to be very tough. I mean, if you look back to week 6 when the Bucs played the Packers the first time this season, the Packers allowed 5 sacks of Rodgers. So your point about protecting him and doing a really good job against the Rams is true, but they've already failed against the Bucs once. Who's to say that doesn't happen again? And also Rodgers threw 2 picks in that game as well.
So I think looking at both of the NFC games from last week, I think the victories or the victors that came out were particularly strong, but in part I think that was because of the bad play of the other teams. We kind of hinted a bit there about the Tampa success on D being based on Drew Brees, and I think that is probably the last we'll see of Drew Brees, and it is probably a shame, but you could see that much like it happened at Peyton Manning, his arm strength just got away from him. I think the Rams' performance against the Packers was not a very good performance across the board by the team. And 2 out of 3 years that the Rams have been in the playoffs where their seasons have ended with poor performances. There is that consideration to make. But I think Aldrin is right. I think all of this comes down to Aaron Rodgers, because Paul Merson may be the magic man according to Sky Sports Fantasy Football, but Aaron Rodgers is the magic man in the NFL. He can do incredible things with stretching out plays, reading defenses, drawing teams off.
I mean, we've got to Paul Merson early doors, haven't we? That's...
I think you're doing a bit of a disservice and a disrespect to the Bucs D there, to be honest, to say their performance last week was purely down to Drew Brees. I mean, Devin White was the best player on the field by a wide margin. He was everywhere. And if that's, from being held out, unfortunately, due to a positive COVID test from the first playoff game, he was chomping at the bit to get out there. And I think that, proved in his performance. And also it's, it wasn't like the turnovers were only from Brees. You got Jared Cook, the tight end, who caught the ball and then gets it punched out by Winfield, and then White recovers it and kind of, stiff arms Michael Thomas into next season. And I think it's just to say it was purely down to Brees not playing well and New Orleans not playing well is a bit harsh, because I think the Bucs didn't allow them to play well at the same time.
So I think chomping at the bit there applies both to Devin White and Phil in attempting to get back in and defend the Bucs. And maybe I didn't make my point in the way that I wanted to. It wasn't that the Bucs' success was solely because of a poor performance by Brees. It was more setting up the fact that going into this game and thinking the Bucs defense is fixed, the Bucs defense will be fine, is dangerous, because you're not going up against a declining Drew Brees. You're going up against a still in his prime Aaron Rodgers. So I think the Bucs defense has its positives, and it did prove that last week, but it needs to continue to raise its game because it's facing an altogether different kind of animal this week.
Oh, don't get me wrong. I'm not suddenly thinking that the Bucs pass defense is the best in the league, because it's quite clearly not. Our run defense is the best in the league. And if you look at the Packers game last week against the Rams, They had 188 rushing yards. That's not going to happen, I don't think, this weekend. Whether we come on to talk about the Bucks or we just do it naturally through this conversation, Vita Vea looks like he might be back in the roster this weekend, which is an even bigger boost to our run game. So, I can't see them getting that complementary run game to go with Rodgers' passing ability. And without that run game, does that mean there's more pressure on Rodgers and the Bucks can get to him a bit quicker? So it's an interesting game. I don't think suddenly, I don't think the Bucks are favourites, and I don't think the Bucks' defensive woes from earlier in the season are suddenly solved. But I think you're underplaying it a little bit. They're in the conference championship game and they deserve to be there. I think all four teams that we're talking about this weekend are four of the best teams in the league this season. I think I don't think anybody's kind of snuck in there, by luck or by chance.
There's a point made about the turnover battle, and I think that would be key. I think if Green Bay turn over the ball, or let's put it the other way, if the Bucks can force turnovers, this game gets an awful lot closer than maybe I imagine it will be. The thing about opponents last week, let's not forget, we're talking about divisional round games. These are the 8 best teams left in the league. But I would agree to an extent that the Packers particularly played within themselves. Again, we've talked about, when will somebody force the Packers to use that extra gear that it kind of feels like they've got. And a little bit like the Bills that we'll get onto later. When you talk about those clutch moments, they have got an absolute roster full of superstars who in those big moments have been making big plays. We haven't even talked really about the Packers on the defensive side of the ball, where they've certainly got playmakers too. And yeah, I just think you're right. I think the Packers have a clean game. The Packers don't turn over the ball. Rodgers, plays as he has been this season. I think that gives them the edge, but not a lot has to turn for me for this to feel pretty close.
Yeah, I think to Phil's point, I know that Rodgers turned the ball over twice against Tampa earlier in the year, but he only turned the ball over 3 other times across the entire season. So I think, he's, as has kind of been a hallmark of his career, he's efficient with the ball and he's secure with it. So I do think, like you say, if they can keep a clean pocket and he can reduce turnovers, or like it can prevent Tampa from forcing turnovers, then yeah, a resurgent Aaron Rodgers is just something to behold and something really difficult to stop. But we haven't even touched on the Green Bay defense, but I think that'll probably naturally come on when Phil tries to laud the talents of the Bucks offense. So
first of all, I just want to say, can I please pass on my apologies that none of your teams have made it this far? The jealousy is striking. I can't help that my team have made it through, so I'm a little bit more passionate.
Well, I really enjoy seeing the New England Patriots. Oh, sorry, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers get this far with that brand new quarterback of theirs. And
so I made that point last week about it being a bit of a disjointed offense in the first week of the season with no training camp and preseason and all that kind of stuff. So that first week was the last time that Tom Brady has thrown an interception on the road. So he's not thrown an interception in a road game since week 1, which isn't just an impressive streak this year. It's the longest streak in NFL history.
Like it might come to an end this week, mightn't it? You've just given him the kiss of death.
He's not thrown too many picks at home. I think the last one he did it was probably more so on Scotty Miller than it was on him. But, that's... We'll come on to that anyway. I was going to go back to your point about Aaron Rodgers. I think the most dangerous thing for me about Aaron Rodgers at the moment is that he looks, he's got a point to prove. When there was all the fuss when they drafted, is it Love in the draft last year? It said that it peed him off and he was coming out with a point to prove. And I think he's played like that. He's had an MVP season without doubt. But the second thing is, the thing that's probably is most scary about Rodgers at the moment is he's having fun. I talked last week about the Bills dancing to MC Hammer before their game. There was a video this week of the Packers doing similar to some other song. And they look loose. There's a good vibe there. They're all in on Aaron Rodgers and how he's playing. He's playing lights out. So, they're the best team in the NFC this season, no doubt. And, it's going to be a big ask for someone to come in and turn them over at Lambeau.
I do think you touched on what I was just going to say then. Them being at Lambeau, I think, makes a real difference.
It's a weird one because in a season where, home field advantage hasn't meant an awful lot, when people just look around and see empty seats, Lambeau feels like one of those stadiums that's maybe a little different, whether it's the weather, whether it's just the feel of the place, I don't know, but it'll be interesting to see. So we've held you back, I think, enough, PB. I think you've already squeezed in quite a bit. I mean, in a podcast that's already featured mentions of Paul Merson and Vita Vea, I think it's only fair that we throw over and let you talk in detail about the Bucks.
Well, I think it's the conversation's coming out naturally, isn't it, really? But, I think if you look back to the Bucks' performance on Sunday, there was, a lot of the talk going in was that the Saints were the stronger team. They weren't necessarily worried, Cam Jordan saying that they're already in the Bucks' heads and all that stuff. So I think it just provided that motivation. It's similar to that we talked about before with, the Steelers providing that motivation to the Browns and all this kind of stuff. So, I think it was a complete performance on D. I think there were still some issues on offense. Chris Godwin dropped a touchdown that probably he should have held on to, arguably. I don't think Evans was in the game much, held out by Lattimore. Apart from Cameron Brate, I don't think we didn't throw much to Gronk. I think Brady overthrew him on a couple of passes, but then other people stepped up. You had Tyler Johnson on that third down, crucial third down when the Saints could have turned around and kind of run away with the game, making that incredible catch. He may never have a better catch in his career, and Scotty Miller with another one later on. I think everybody stepped up and did a little bit rather than anybody looking particularly spectacular. You look at the running game that's been a little bit hit and miss all year. Rojo's had a good season, but, it's never looked, when Fournette and Jones have both been in, it's never looked brilliant. But actually, I think the two of them both went over 60 yards on Sunday, and it was a good, real good 1-2 punch keeping the fresh man in. So, I think the defense played well. And if we play like that again this week, it will give them a good chance. Offense, I think they probably, if the Bucks are going to beat the Packers, the offense probably does need to play better this week, I think.
So my question would be exactly on that point. You follow them more closely than any of us. In a world where the Bucks need to score, 32 plus points to win this weekend, do you feel the way they're playing at the moment, the Antonio Brown factor that seems to be growing little by little, week on week, do you think they're capable of that? A big 30, maybe even up around a 40-point performance on the road?
It will be tough. I don't think anybody's, saying anything different. But if you look, we put 30 points up against the Saints last week. So it can be done against good teams. Antonio Brown's an interesting one because he hurt his knee quite early on against the Saints and he had an MRI and there's no real damage or kind of long-term damage, but he's day to day and he didn't practice today. So, that's going to be one to watch. But then if he's not playing, Scotty Miller will get more involved again, and Tyler Johnson might get a bit more involved. So I think we've got strength in depth, especially at receiver. I think the last two games, you've got Chase Young of Washington and Cam Jordan at the Saints. Their pass rush is pretty fearsome. So Gronk's been doing a lot of blocking, particularly against Washington. I think, not even sure the Bucks targeted him for a pass because he was blocking so much. But if you look at Green Bay's pass rush, I think it was, way lower down in the league. Not a particularly fearsome pass rush, although I think they got to Goff a few times last week. So, will Gronk be able to abandon the block a little bit and will he become, a bigger part of the offense? But then because they weren't thrown to Gronk, Cameron Brate had a good game. So, yes, I think they can put up 30 points, but it's going to be getting the running game going early, because when the Bucks get the running game going early, it opens up the passing game with play action and not knowing what they're going to do. Whereas if the running game is stale, everybody knows that Brady's going to try and pass the ball, and that's when the Bucks get into a little bit more trouble, I think.
That's the thing that I think will be the key for the Bucks. Like you say, getting the run game going, not just because, as you mentioned, when the Bucks get the run game going, they do well, but definitely this season that has been Green Bay's weakness, is that run defense. They've conceded massive games to like Dalvin Cook and people like that earlier in the year. Now, obviously Dalvin Cook's a bit of a freak and an anomaly, but he put up 150 plus yards, I think 3 or 4 touchdowns. So that feels like the way in which the Bucks can move back down the field effectively and open up those lanes to get more points on the board. Now, if you're wanting to be able to keep pace with the Packers, then somebody like Ronald Jones is going to have to step up and have that kind of 100 plus yard game to allow the field to open up for Brady. Plus, that's just easy points for them. If they can get through that not great run defense of Green Bay, then move the ball effectively, which is what they're going to need to do.
Yeah, I think I'm just looking to the Week 6 game against the Packers, and Jones ran for 113 yards and 2 touchdowns. Fournette didn't play. Keyshawn Vaughn was the next biggest rusher with 42 yards off 5 carries. So I think you've actually touched on a good point there, that their run defense isn't brilliant. It's not amazing. So that's going to be an interesting one. So hopefully we can, the Bucs can get the run going.
It'll be interesting though, because I think you've got to have Ronald Jones has got to have that like superstar game. I think he's kind of flirted with it this year, and a few odd games where he's gone off and had like 100 plus yard games. But
it was playoff Lenny, as they call him, that stepped up on Sunday. So maybe it'll be Fournette that kind of tears one off and has a great game. We'll see.
I agree with both of you, and I think the run game is especially important for the Bucs, because by running the ball, by grinding out the yards and grinding down the clock, you give Aaron Rodgers less opportunity with the ball to do something. And you want to win that time of possession if you're anyone going up against the Packers. But I think while we did sort of outline Aaron Rodgers as the straw that stirs the drink for the Packers, I think we also have to look at the guy heading up the Bucs offense. So Joe Montana has the second most quarterback wins in playoff history with 16. Would anyone like to guess who number 1 on that list is?
Is it Paul Merson?
No.
It's Blake Bortles, right?
Unfortunately, Blake Bortles does not crack the top 10 of this list. No, number 1 on the list is, of course, Tom Brady. And Tom Brady is top of the list with 32 wins. So for those of you that can do the maths, that's double the amount as Joe Montana. We all know, because we have watched this game for long enough, how good Tom Brady is in the playoffs. Setting aside the Patriots teams, for as much as they've had their pluses, they've had their negatives as well. I think this Bucs team measures up just as well to any of the good Patriots teams that Brady has played with. And we have talked as well about the saying of, doesn't matter what happens in the regular season, you just get to the tournament. Because when you're in the tournament, everything changes. And Tampa Bay may have playoff Lenny, but I think playoff Tommy is probably the one that they're going to look to lead, and who better than Brady?
You're absolutely right. I think the Bucs always stand a chance with Brady at the helm, really. And there's a lot of talk about it being really cold. It's probably going to be a snow game. I don't think it's going to be as cold on Sunday as it is on Friday and Saturday, but it looks like it's going to snow Friday, Saturday, so there's at least going to be snow on the ground. But that's been put to a number of the Bucs this week, and they've basically said it's you're only cold when you're out on the field, and then you're not cold because you're playing. On the benches, they've got all the heaters and the big coats and stuff like that. So actually, I don't think those kind of games are going to be as big a deal as maybe they are in college and high school and stuff like that. So it's going to be a really interesting game. And I think, if Green Bay can get up early, I said this last week, Audrey, I know you're going to take the mick. If Green Bay can get up early, then it's going to be a very difficult task for the Bucs to bring that back and try and catch up and overtake them. But, if the Bucs can get ahead and Brady can start to control the pace a little bit, then it's going to be, an interesting game. I could see it going either way, really. Green Bay are obviously heavy favourites, but then the Bucs beat them earlier in the season. So, you just don't know really, do you?
I think that run point is interesting about trying to run on the Packers, because I think we can pick those examples like the Bucs, and the Vikings game is probably the one, isn't it? Probably the one standout. If it was that easy, surely everybody would have done it. How much of the Packers improved since? How much of the Packers learned since those defeats? I still have them as the class of the NFC. I think it is odd to think that the lowest seeded team left of our 4 is a team led by Tom Brady, like you say, Mr. Playoff. I think close, but I think for me, not as close as the game that's maybe going on in the other conference. I think the Packers would edge it for me. And obviously, ordinarily, Aldrin, we'd be handing over to you to see who you're putting in Club Dub, as we have all picked teams this week rather than games. I'll go first and say I think I'm going to absolutely be pitching for a Packers win.
Well, yeah, I chose them as my team of the week for a reason. I think they're heading to the Super Bowl, and ultimately maybe coming out the champs of that too. So yeah, Packers for me.
Phil, I know we're going to have a head-on-heart conversation now for the next 30 seconds, but if we could imagine you've reached the end of that particular diatribe, who are you going for?
So funnily enough, I was going to say it's a head versus heart one. And I said that last week about the Saints game, and my head was saying everything points to a Saints win, and my heart obviously was with the Bucks.
Have you not turned the page on your notebook, Phil?
No, I haven't, no. My metaphor toilet paper, I haven't needed to use it again yet. But this week, the Packers are the smart play. They're at home. They've been the best team in the NFC this season. Aaron Rodgers is probably going to be the league MVP.
So, of course, you're picking the Bucks.
I've picked the Bucks in 2 weeks so far, and they've won. And I'm a very superstitious person in that sense. So I'm going to have to pick the Bucks to win this week. And here's hoping they can be the first team to play a home Super Bowl.
JB, round us out.
I've picked the Buccaneers.
That's it. Brothers stick together.
So no one quite in Club Dub then. A 2-2 split. So let's throw it over now to the second game of the weekend, where we have the reigning Super Bowl champions, the Kansas City Chiefs, taking on a team that have never won a Super Bowl, namely the Buffalo Bills. So for Chiefs against Bills, it's going to be myself and JB. And I'm going to throw over to you, JB, first, so you can talk us through the Chiefs.
I think the big question for the Chiefs and for Chiefs fans, Chief Kingdom, is what's going on with Patrick Mahomes. To give the listeners a little bit of a peek behind the curtain, we are recording this on Thursday night. It is currently 23 minutes past 9 in the evening. And Patrick Mahomes was limited at practice for the second time this week and has not passed concussion protocol. So Mahomes isn't cleared yet to play the game. A lot is being ignored of the fact that even before Mahomes was taken out of the game last week, he was already quite impeded by, I think, what they were calling turf toe injury. And you see him limping around from play to play. He did not have the same escapability, the same explosion in his movements. So if he does get cleared for the concussion to play, is he going to be the same Patrick Mahomes that we saw just before we started? I did have on screen the career stats for Patrick Mahomes to compare to the career stats for Chad Henne, and threw those out immediately. Regardless of who's throwing the ball, the Chiefs are still going to have Travis Kelce, Tyreek Hill. They'll potentially have Clyde Edwards-Helaire. They might not have Le'Veon Bell because he didn't practice today. And all of the contributors that we saw last week. So we saw big plays from Mecole Hardman. We saw a couple of big catches from Byron Pringle. The Chiefs can spread the ball around no matter who is there. The most important thing is the Chiefs still have Andy Reid and the Chiefs still have Eric Bieniemy. And those two combined on offense are a challenge for absolutely anybody. Defensively, I think you saw the big plays from Tyrann Mathieu last week when he picked off Baker Mayfield, saw how the team responded to the rise of the Browns. Yes, the big play to talk about on defense was the hit on the Browns player where he fumbled it out of the end zone, and I think that's going to be a talking point for several weeks still. But ultimately, the Chiefs didn't stall out, but slowed down on offense, and the defense rose to the occasion and matched what the Browns were doing. So I think it's an uncertain game for the Chiefs, but it's not an impossible one.
So are you saying that in a world where Patrick Mahomes doesn't start for the Chiefs, you still see the Chiefs having a pretty good chance in this game?
Yes, I don't think that's a crazy statement.
I do against the Bills. I think the Bills have looked really good this year. The Bills, I think, are easily the second. Oh, I mean, they're in the AFC Championship game, so you would say they're easily the second best team in the AFC this year. But I think it's, they've got a lot of parts on offense, but I think their defense has been really good as well. And I think, if you look at Henne when he came into the game last week, he threw that awful interception, in the fourth quarter, that if the Browns had kind of put their foot on the throat a little bit, that could have really turned the game I think if you give him a whole championship game against the Bills, I think if Mahomes doesn't play, then the Bills are going to walk all over him. But I think, we're talking about if Mahomes doesn't play. I think Mahomes is 99.9% definitely going to play. I'd be amazed if Mahomes isn't playing on Sunday.
I think, but what you're also doing is you're comparing a performance when I think legitimately nobody was expecting Henne to come in and play versus the opportunity to prep him and prep the game plan to say, right, if he does have to go in, what are his strengths? What plays does he like I also think for as much as we can say, oh, yeah, throw that awful interception, what about that run? The run at the end of the game to get the first down and run the clock out was the kind of play that you want your quarterback to make.
It was a throw on fourth down that really, that showed that Reed obviously has a lot of trust in him because, I was listening to Tony Romo in the commentary who said, oh, he's lining up in the shotgun. They're just trying to call him offside. He's definitely not going to throw it. And then the ball got snapped to him.
It was the run before then to get them in that position that close on fourth down that to me said a lot about what Chad Henne can do and how good he can be. I'm not going to go all hashtag anything's possible, but I don't think with the amount of weaponry that the Chiefs have that it is that crazy a statement.
I think Rob's question was a really good one in terms of, do you think that they can beat the Bills with Chad Henne at quarterback? And I'm one of these people that I've watched the Bills the last few weeks and I keep waiting for them to stumble. I keep waiting them to be the Bills that we actually know and go off a cliff, but they've just not done that. And I think we were talking before in my kind of preview into my Club Dub prediction, but my choice this week came with a bit of a caveat of if Mahomes plays. And I think that is really the key for me because, yeah, I think you're right. Andy Reid coaching a team makes them infinitely better. And even a player like Chad Henne, he'll get the best out of. But I do think against Josh Allen and that Bills offense, I don't think Chad Henne can keep pace with them. Mahomes, yeah, and I think it'll be a real close game and it could go the distance, but I just don't. The weakness I see in the Chiefs without Patrick Mahomes is that defense is not getting the stops that it was capable of last year. And the Bills have certainly shown that they can just break teams down and, well, Allen just looks unplayable at times. So I just think that with Chad Henne at quarterback, it doesn't give them the same options that they have with obviously Patrick Mahomes. But
I think anything's possible is going to look a really foolish hashtag come the end of this weekend. I mean, I get the point about Andy Reid. I get the point about the way they scheme. I get the point about a week of practice. But Andy Reid, this absolutely lauded and genius of an NFL coach, has only ever won one Super Bowl. And that one Super Bowl he won with Patrick Mahomes. And he didn't win a Super Bowl a lot of seasons with quarterbacks a hell of a lot better than Chad Henne. So let's kind of appreciate the limitations here and the fact that, I hope Chad Henne has a good game. I think, the likes of Travis Kelce, give him a chance to move the sticks and to move that football down the field. But what else? What else is there really that you'd say is going to be? I think they lose that ability to improvise. I think with Mahomes on the sideline, that relationship he has with those big time players, the Hills, I just think any quarterback coming in, whoever it was, just doesn't quite have that, don't they? They don't quite have that. And the Bills have got a defense that are going to make plays break down. The Bills have got a defense that'll, have any quarterback holding the ball that little bit longer, and I just think this could be really straightforward without Mahomes. And I still give the Bills a really good chance with Mahomes, to cause, would it even be an upset? I suppose a mini upset of sorts and find their way into the Super Bowl.
If you're the Kansas City Chiefs, you come into that game with a weight knowing that we've not got our guy. We've got Chad Henne and they've got Josh Allen. And like Phil said, they'll be dancing on the sidelines. They'll be having fun. They'll be playing loose. And that could be a real big factor. I
think there's a good point made by JB, though, about Tyrann Mathieu. I think when you lose a superstar player, who's going to beat the drum, who's going to make the plays. And I think for me, the only chance the Chiefs have without Mahomes is keeping the Bills below 20 points. And the best chance they've got of keeping the Bills below 20 points is turnovers, hard and fast football on defense. The kind of thing that Tyrann Mathieu brings week after week.
So not wanting to move too much into a discussion on the Bills and potentially take more points that Rob was going to make away from him, but we are looking at a Bills team that has played 2 games so far. The first against the Colts was a very close run game. The Bills didn't play badly, but the Colts didn't play badly either. It was 2 good teams duking it out. Last week against the Ravens, the Bills went in with a very, very specific game plan of make them throw. And they talked about it on the I think it was the CBS coverage of the game in America. They talked about it on the Sky Sports coverage about how the Bills were getting great push on Lamar Jackson without blitzing. It was just sending 3 guys like usual, and they were getting in the backfield because the Ravens line is fantastic at run blocking and not as good at pass blocking. The Chiefs line isn't the Ravens line. The Chiefs line is good at both. The Bills will need to make Chad Henne, if he plays, or even Patrick Mahomes, if he's not as mobile as he should be normally, make him hold the ball. And I think going into the game, again, Andy Reid and Eric Bieniemy would be like, right, this is what they're going to do. So this is what we need to do in return. And I would expect quick throws. We're going to see a lot of get the ball out of whoever it is hands quickly. And potentially, instead of a big play offense, this is a death by 1,000 cuts one instead.
So if those are kind of the big points around the Chiefs, and as we did before, I think we've already started to touch on the Bills. Let me fling it over to the Bills now fully, and let me tell you why I think this season's Bills, and I think my earliest Super Bowl prediction for the Bills probably came in week 3, I think, where I first thought they had the makings of a Super Bowl team. But to start my point, I want to go back to something Aldrin said about we're waiting for them to turn into the Bills we know. If you look at the Bills since the year 2000, up until the point Sean McDermott becomes head coach, we all know about the fact they didn't have playoff appearances. But during that period, since the year 2000, they had 2 winning seasons. Now, one of those winning seasons was followed by their head coach, Doug Marrone at the time, not being fired, but opting out of his contract. A guy who'd taken the Bills to 9-7 thought, you know what? I can't see myself doing that again in a hurry. And off Doug goes to land, what was it, a few weeks, months later with the Jacksonville Jaguars. Now, when Sean McDermott comes in, this is a guy who was building a pretty solid NFL resume as a defensive coordinator at, was it the Carolina Panthers? And this guy comes in and has absolutely changed that franchise. You know, a ground-up rebuild, the way that many other front offices talk about but never quite achieve. This guy has turned them into a winning operation year after year, solid defense, interesting offense, adding playmakers, improving at the skill positions every year. And now look at what we get. You add to that coaching the fact that this year's Bills have star quality. They've added a wide receiver who suddenly looks like a bargain, you know, trading that first round pick. You've got a quarterback who, although he's been there now for a few years, has absolutely excelled. I mean, we're looking at Josh Allen achieving about 8 yards per pass attempt with a 70% completion rating this season of 4,500 yards. I mean, those are the kind of numbers that if you put the name Patrick Mahomes next to that, or, you know, or Aaron Rodgers next to that, for that matter, you know, nobody would think those names would look out of place against those types of statistical seasons. And I just don't see how you could bet against them. Certainly not against a Chad Henne Chiefs, but I don't think you bet against them against a Mahomes Chiefs either. I mean, I think I've said, you know, last week, the week before, you know, we've got to remember that this is a season that, yeah, it was impacted by COVID, you know, but the biggest impact for me was the fact that this was a season with no preseason, a season with limited training camps, a season with limited OTAs. And I've said about all these teams that are playing well that they've done so relying on great coaching, really clear messages from the coaches about how those teams play, really good, really well-drilled units in all 3 phases. And the Bills are just the best example of that for me. You will look back in 2 or 3 weeks' time and it will feel so obvious that this 2020-21 season was always going to be about the Buffalo Bills.
Such good points, and they're all absolutely valid. And I think I just go back to my point earlier. I'm waiting for them to turn into that Bills team of old, and it's just not happening. I just don't see it happening either. They seem so high on confidence and so in the zone. I think that's what it is. Like James said, the Bills weren't great against the Colts the other week, and it was 2 good teams slugging it out. To Rob's point that week when we were talking about it, Josh Allen just knows how to get it done. In clutch moments, he makes things happen. And this year he has been off the scale. That Diggs trade couldn't have gone any better for them and for Stephon Diggs. I think he's turned himself around because he kind of had that moniker of a bit of a troublemaker and, you know, maybe didn't quite fulfill his potential all of the time. But this year he's made that wide receiver group elite. And like you say, they've got playmakers across the board.
You know, at the start of this season, we could have done a podcast about, is Stephon Diggs truly a number one receiver? And is Josh Allen the long-term solution at quarterback for the Buffalo Bills? And could they have answered those questions any better? To your point again on, we're waiting for them to turn into those old Bills. The Sean McDermott Buffalo Bills have never been those type of Bills.
I think the Bills are just... They're a team, aren't they? I think if you look at the Chiefs, I'm not saying the Chiefs aren't a team, but you look at the Chiefs, they've got superstar players all across the board. You know, Matthew, you've already touched on D, Mahomes, Hill, Kelsey. And I think, you know, the Bills have got some big names like Allen's, you know, really stepped up a bit more this year. Diggs as well. But outside of that, you know, they're just a solid bunch. If you look at their running game, it's not great. You know, against the Ravens last week, I think they had 32 rushing yards. I think the first 20 plays they had on offense, they passed 19 times. They only rushed once. So, you know, I think that tells a story. I think you need, when you get to this stage of the playoffs, you need a dual threat. And I think you need to get the run game and the passing game going. So I think that's going to be a big thing for them. So was it Moss, their running back, that's gone down?
Yeah, Zach Moss went down. But
so
I mean, to be brutally honest, and I kind of touched on it last week, they've abandoned the run game almost altogether. Like the last few weeks, even before Zach Moss went down injured, they've not...
Allen had 7 carries last week. You know, albeit I don't know if any of them were in victory formation, but they had 7 carries for 3 yards, whereas Singletary was their other main back, had 7 carries for 25 yards. It's just nothing. So I think against the Chiefs, you're going to need to get some sort of running game going. I know they brought in Devonta Freeman last week, you know, onto their practice squad. I think we mentioned, whoever did that game mentioned it last week. So whether with an extra week they decide to put him in, you know, I don't know. Whether he's kind of a spent force now, I'm not sure. But they're, you know, going back to what I was originally saying, they're just a bunch of, you know, they're a solid team that play well together. And I think they've not really got any highlight reel superstars where you think, oh, you need to mark, apart from Diggs, you know, you need to mark out Hill, you need to mark out Kelsey. And then they've got, for the Chiefs, they've got McCall, Hardman and Sammy Watkins. You know, I think with the Bills, they could go anywhere, because if the Bills win, it's going to be a full team performance. I don't think they're going to win with someone getting 200 yards and 3 touchdowns through the air, or, you know, someone rushing for 150 yards and 2 touchdowns. I think it's going to be 30 yards here, 60 yards there, 50 yards there, and you know, spread out a little bit.
I think you're probably right. You know, when you've got a quarterback that's got 4,500 yards, it probably suggests the run wasn't the biggest part of the offensive thinking this season. I don't think that's a surprise. I think you're all spot on. But stop it. You know, tell me who stopped the Bills throwing the ball. Tell me who's done to the Bills what we're now asking the Chiefs to do. I mean, as a Cardinals fan, I could talk to you about, you know, the Hail Murray. I could talk to you about that amazing performance and that win up at State Farm Stadium. But ultimately, if you take away that final play and those last few seconds of madness, with under 2 minutes on the clock, Josh Allen had driven the length of the field and put the ball in Diggs' hand in the end zone. You know, I think, you know, in those big moments, and I still come back to, you've just referred a couple of times, guys, to that Colts game. It was that minute up until half time in that Colts game. It was in 3 passes. He was able to undo 7 or 8 minutes of good work by the Colts by just finding 3 receivers with absolutely mind-blowing throws. And that was it. You know, that was it. That was all it took. And, you know, he's exciting to watch. Josh Allen, the Bills are so exciting to watch. You know, this weekend, good things happen to the Bills.
Can I just interject? I know we've heard from our listeners about the systemic bullying that I received from the 3 of you. At least when I mentioned my team, they're still in the game. You've just mentioned your favourite team, Rob, and they didn't even make the playoffs. You've shoehorned them in there.
Do you know what, Phil? I would really love to know who the punter is for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, because I think every other member of that roster has already been mentioned by name.
Bradley Pinion.
There you go.
Also, the bullying's fully justified.
Yeah. The point that Rob has made there, I think, is the most valid counter to what kind of we're saying about with regard to the Bills and getting away from the run. The like, do it until they stop you, and the teams haven't done it. Last week and the week before, the broadcast for the Ravens game talked so much and so frequently about how successful Lamar Jackson is rushing the ball. Here's how successful the Ravens were rushing last season. Here's how successful the Ravens were rushing this season. And the Ravens can read all about those stats at home, watching the Bills play the Chiefs in the AFC Championship game. And that's not a massive dig at the Ravens or anything like that, but an illustration of the fact that the Bills came into that game knowing exactly what the Ravens were going to do, and they were able to stop. And as much as I do believe in the Chiefs, and I do think this is going to go in a specific direction, it's not as clear cut as it potentially would be. And I think you're right. There is a tendency to think, oh, these Bills are going to morph into those Rex Ryan, Doug Marrone Bills that we have seen in recent times, and it's probably not going to happen.
I think the only thing that gives me pause with the Bills is just that they weren't great last week. I know they got the win, but only the one offensive touchdown in games where we even talked about it, where we kind of said the Bills would expect to come out and have to put up big numbers, and they just didn't. And I think they weren't great against the Colts. The Ravens game, yeah, they got the win, but it just wasn't the offensive masterclass that I was expecting. And that's not to say that Josh Allen didn't put up good numbers. He did put up great numbers. It was a low scoring game for what was a great amount of offense, but that's the only thing that gives me pause. But I think you're right. It's so close. I don't think you can really even call it.
But the other thing to consider, as much as we've talked about the impact of Patrick Mahomes being out and how that's going to impact the Chiefs this week, when the Ravens needed to make their big comeback push, they had to do it without their league MVP first round superstar quarterback in Lamar Jackson, and were essentially on their fourth string quarterback. The Bills conquered a Ravens team that ultimately had one wing clipped.
The Bills can only beat the team that's in front of them. You know, you can't talk down the Bills because they beat an understrength Ravens. If an understrength Ravens is what's on the field, then an understrength Ravens is what you've got to beat.
Ultimately, we don't really know how that game could have gone if it had gone down to the wire of Allen versus Jackson.
And if the Bills beat the team that's in front of them this weekend, a team like we keep saying, maybe without Patrick Mahomes, I don't think you can blame them for that either. I mean, I think ultimately, you know, we're a step away from the big one and everyone wants to go at the dance, right? I think, you know, Mahomes or not, I think the Bills feel ready. So anyway, gents, I'm going to roll around the room. So we had a dead heat last time, 2 for the Bucks, 2 for the Packers. So I'm going to kick off with the most obvious. I'm going to say the Bills win. Aldrin, I'm going to you next.
Really close, but I think the Chiefs edge it if Mahomes plays.
PB, is this a head versus heart type conundrum for you?
I'm not having that if Mahomes plays. You need to pin your colours to the mast, Aldrin.
No, I don't get me wrong. I think the Chiefs will win, but I think, you know, if he doesn't, then it gives Bills a chance. But yeah, I'm going with the Chiefs.
I've actually gone for the Bills in this one. You know, again, this is you could pick any of these 4 teams to get through to the Super Bowl, but I'm going for the Bills.
JB,
I think all 4 of us are in agreement that this is probably the closest game to pick. Ultimately, I've gone with the Chiefs as my team of the week because I think it will be a Chiefs victory. But if the Bills won, I don't think it would be an upset. So
in an absolute disaster for the 4 of us as famed podcasters, the Club Dub podcast has now failed to put a single team into Club Dub. I think we should just let that sink in. That feels like a moment. Thank you everyone for joining us for another week of NFL Chat. The next time we get together, we'll be talking all things Super Bowl. Thanks ever so much for listening, and we'll catch you all soon.
Take care now.
Spotify will love that.
This is amazing.
Remember to subscribe and be cool. Tell your friends.